9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm your host. And this week we want to talk about something that's been in the news, the new administration and the focus the president has had in really disrupting things, turning them upside down in law enforcement and intelligence, and what that might mean, where that might go. And we are extremely fortunate to have with us a friend, Frank Figliuzzi, is a national security contributor and regular columnist for NBC News and MSNBC. He was the assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, where he served 25 years as a special agent and directed all espionage investigations across the government. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm good, and I'm wondering in our limited time how we're going to manage to fit in all of the nominees in question. I think we're going to have to talk about the worst of the worst, apparently.
Yeah, well, we are. I think we'll stay one step ahead of the nominees story because I think Hegseth may be on his last legs, but that's then going to turn attention either first to Kash Patel or first to Tulsi Gabbard, but then to the other one, because those seem to be the most controversial. Let me start with Kash Patel, because, you spent 25 years in the FBI. There's a great tradition there. And here, for the first time in the history of the FBI, somebody is being nominated to run the FBI who seems to hate the institution, wants to gut it, said he wants to shut down the headquarters and turn it into a museum to the deep state. And I just can't imagine that's being received very well within the building or among people who care about what's going on in the building. And I'm just wondering what your sense is of all this.
It's deeply troubling. Yes, indeed. I wrote a book called The FBI Way, which was my form of pushback early on when Trump was bureau bashing, as I call it, on a regular basis. And I wrote that book because this means a lot to the American people. When you impact the mission of the rank and file FBI employees who have to display their badge and credentials every day to members of the public needs to trust them. There's credibility there. And look, there's no question that now at least half or more of the public questions the FBI and their mission and their ability to carry it out. We can talk for an hour about where all that comes from. It largely comes from Donald Trump. But now putting nominees in place across our institutions, particularly Kash Patel, who are not only unqualified, that's the least of my concerns right now. I'm telling people, look, the least of our worries is the lack of qualifications. What should be the chief concern is this blind allegiance to a human being, Donald Trump, seemingly over the rule of law and the Constitution. The kind of language that Kash Patel is using over and over again, you don't have to listen to me. Listen to his own words. Listen to how they match the almost verbatim the words being used by Pam Bondi, the nominee for AG. And you've got a recipe for flipping the entire federal justice system, prosecution and investigations, into a highly weaponized pursuit of political enemies. Now, even as I say that, David, I already hear the MAGA far right going, yes, that's exactly what's been done under the Biden administration. But if we have a moment to just quickly explore that faulty premise that Patel has based his entire mission on, this notion of a deep state within the Bureau, I can't get anyone to actually tell me, when I throw facts at them, where that deep state is. So, for example, if it's the initiation of Crossfire Hurricane, the Russia counterintelligence case, that was found by the DOJ Inspector General under Bill Barr, to have been properly predicated. And then if that wasn't enough, Bill Barr went out and appointed John Durham as a special counsel to, again, look at the Russia investigation. He attempted 2 trials and found nothing. Jurors looked at him and went, no, you got nothing. The Senate GOP-controlled Intelligence Committee in very harsh language, found that the Russians were indeed trying to assist Trump. Bob Mueller's special counsel inquiry indicted dozens, including 24 Russians, for interfering with elections. So where is this deep state that the entire demise of the Bureau could be premised on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question. I think other people might argue that if you really were weaponizing the Department of Justice, they would have moved a whole hell of a lot faster and actually done a heck of a lot more than they did. I mean, in South Korea, the guy tried to impose martial law, and 2 days later, he's on the verge of being impeached. And in Brazil, they're actually, prosecuting their former president for trying to run a coup. And we seem to not only not do that, but here we have reelected him. Now, that's the will of the American people, and so we must live with it. But we don't have to live with every crazy nomination. And, Trump has presented us with these this kind of worst possible cocktail where you've got somebody with no applicable experience, the worst possible ideas for the agencies, even despite this lack of experience. And in a number of these cases, you've got criminal or semi-criminal behavior. In the case of Patel, he has a little bit of experience, but he's got very bad ideas, and he's been made open threats. I mean, yesterday or the day before, he launched a lawsuit against Olivia Troy, a friend of ours here and somebody you know, because she spoke the truth about how he operated within the government. And to me, that was kind of chilling, because it was kind of, oh, here we go. I wonder about your reaction.
Yeah, that got my attention. I mean, we're talking about a former public servant in Olivia Troy who simply stated her opinion based on her experience and knowledge. If opinion is no longer validly expressed under the Constitution of the United States, then I wonder where the deep state is. I wonder who the deep state is. We express our opinions for a living based on facts, evidence. And if we're looking at suppressing the public expression of opinion, then we've got to look at who the greatest threat is to our democracy and our Constitution. Everything Patel seems to be aimed at doing doesn't make us any safer in terms of safety, security, national security. People need to understand this notion that you're going to empty out FBI headquarters, 7,000 employees, and you're going to tell them to go back home, go work crimes. They're working crimes. The idea that the FBI can work without a transnational vision, without the intelligence from around the world on the latest violent gang from Venezuela to MS-13 in El Salvador to cyber hacking starting from Eastern Europe, the ability to identify hacking signatures as Iranian versus North Korean versus Russian. All of that, international child sex trafficking, human smuggling, that's what goes on. That coordination, that 30,000-foot view is what happens at FBI headquarters. So this comes out of total ignorance and or the desire for a great sounding soundbite. I'm going to close FBI headquarters. Sounds great on the evening news on Fox. Makes us less safer in the community. And for communities concerned about things like, oh, I've got a corrupt mayor or the county commissioner, guess what? If they're Republican, the odds of the FBI working Republican corrupt officials just dropped down to maybe nil. That's a problem. And if they're busy pursuing Trump political enemies in your town or district, what are they not going to do? How about that violent gang in your city? How about that? How about that organized crime family? How about the child sex trafficking? Are they going to have time for that? What are they going to choose not to work? How about civil rights? How about you got a bunch of cops who beat the crap out of people when they pull them over? You concerned about that? Because I doubt civil rights is going to be a high priority for this new administration.
Yeah, well, there's another issue that current FBI director, who somehow Trump is going to try to get rid of, who he appointed, by the way, has said, the principal threat we face comes from domestic terror. And of course, we've talked about it in the past on this show that we don't have a law against, domestic terror. We're lacking that infrastructure. But we could be in a reverse case here, because a lot of those groups are right-wing groups. And the president-elect has said, well, I'm going to pardon a bunch of those January 6th folks. So it seems like an element of this is to give the fringe groups that do pose some kind of a threat, kind of a free pass and a sense that we're not going to have the FBI on our backs, and that this can play into intimidation and some other things. And I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the domestic terrorism challenge. Challenging enough and about to become more challenging. Imagine, look, we're up to over 1,000 people convicted in the January 6th insurrection. Imagine all of them hitting the streets, some of whom have violently assaulted police officers, and then combine that with an FBI headquarters mindset that is, hey, we just emptied out, most of the domestic terrorism section here at headquarters. So if you think the FBI missed the ball, dropped the ball on intelligence related to leading up to January 6th, imagine what's going to happen if there's nobody home looking at the domestic terrorism radar screen, even closing up shops. Patel has publicly stated he's got real problems with the intelligence function of the FBI. By the way, stood up after 9/11, successfully preventing iconic terrorism attacks internationally. So here we are, infrastructure, mindset, motivation. I don't see that stopping. I see it enabling more domestic terror.
Well, disinformation, misinformation campaigns go hand in glove with that. And I think it is worrisome, particularly if we start to pull back the focus a little bit at, the broader intentions of the administration. The nominated FCC director has said he wants to stop the censorship industrial complex. The closest shadow president advisor to the president, Elon Musk, runs a giant disinformation engine. Trump was elected on the back of disinformation and misinformation. And by sort of pulling away from policing disinformation, misinformation, right-wing extremist groups, and so forth, we are clearing the way for a particular political group in the United States to gain influence in a way that's not in the public interest, in my view. What do you think?
Yeah, the odds that violent extremists will feel emboldened, encouraged, and facilitated by people like Trump on a platform that was designed originally to become the public square of the world, and now really is becoming a catch-all for people who can't fit in anywhere else. There's nothing happening on X right now that looks like freedom of speech. Any attempt to exercise freedom of speech is being attacked almost immediately, particularly by trolls that seem to be allowed on there. So look, I hearken back to, and I wrote this in a column for MSNBC Daily. If anybody's thinking out there is old enough to think out there, boy, this sounds familiar. An abusive FBI director targeting perceived threats, political enemies, the media, in cahoots with an AG and a president that let it happen. The answer is you're right. We've seen it before. The director's name was J. Edgar Hoover, and the time frame was the 1960s and very early 1970s before Hoover died. And the targets were largely blacks. The targets were MLK, Martin Luther King, and his entourage, Black Panthers, and anyone perceived as a threat to stable society. Was there a lot of evidence there pointing to them as a threat? Not really, not really. But yet Hoover engaged in every day, telling field offices to plant bugs, microphones, break in, conduct black bag jobs. He wrote and he drafted a letter and sent it to Martin Luther King, suggested he kill himself. And only after Hoover passed and the church hearings in the Congress were held was all of this exposed. By the way, much of it exposed by the news media, Washington Post, New York Times, who came onto this whole COINTEL program of Hoover's counterintelligence program. And then we put all these guardrails in place, Attorney General guidelines. You got to go to court. You got to go to FISA court for wiretaps. You can't plant bugs, illegally, blah, blah, blah. And people go, well, we're good. Those guardrails are there. Hey, I'm here to tell you, those aren't all laws. As you know, add to your list of things to fix from the Trump administration are things like, you're supposed to go to court for all of this. I'm concerned that the FISA court, by the way, which is real live federal judges who rotate, into a skiff for periods of time to hear affidavits and decide wiretaps. They're all going to go to Trump. I mean, those are going to be Trump judges sitting on the court, the FISA court, and you're going to see inevitably abuses happen if FBI agents or stooges are sent into the court to ask for electronic surveillance of Trump's enemies.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, Trump now has immunity, which is not something that we've ever seen a president have before. So he feels he can do whatever he wants in that regard. And I think that has clearly emboldened him to nominate a group of extreme cabinet members. And by the way, I want to quickly point out, the majority of Trump's nominees are not extreme. The majority of them are just what you'd expect. And, the Treasury Secretary or Secretary of State nominees. They're not, I don't necessarily agree with them politically, but that's what you get when you have an election, right? But some of them are so extreme that we've never seen anything like it. And although we've talked about Hegseth or Gates or Kash Patel, I think one of the most extraordinary cases is Tulsi Gabbard. Now, you've spent a good deal of your life dealing with intelligence as a consumer, and somebody who depended on intelligence in your day-to-day job. She's an unusual pick to head the entire intelligence community because, A, she has no intelligence experience ever, even in her, days as a junior officer in the military or in the Congress. But she has also embraced foreign leaders like Bashar al-Assad or Vladimir Putin in rather extraordinary ways and has bought into Russian propaganda, disinformation, that is, they're not 15 views on where this came from. Her argument that the U.S. is responsible for the war in Ukraine because we had labs in Ukraine that were doing, all sorts of nefarious things. It's just not true. It's something the Russians made up. But she offered it out there. And there are people on the Hill, serious people I know in the intelligence community, who wonder whether she is compromised or how she is compromised, and who say she is the biggest threat of all of these people because there are 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, and we've already seen Trump has a kind of very interesting and relaxed view of intelligence. So what's your view of her?
So look, I guess as head of counterintelligence, I was not only a consumer of the community's intel, but also a collector, of course, and briefed the DNI countless times in my career and had an FBI supervisor of mine stationed at the DNI as an embed there. So what's the role? People need to understand this. The DNI decides the shopping list for the intelligence community. This is what we're going to try to collect. We're all going to row in this direction this year. There are frequent updates to that. Hey, this month we need this and this. And then decides even what gets to the president, literally deciding what goes into the presidential daily brief or not. So what doesn't get collected, what does get collected, and what gets presented to the president. She's going to learn that that's a tough job. First of all, getting all those agencies to row in the same direction, deciding their budgets. And if she starts saying, look, I read this in a Russia Times article that, Syria is a good situation. We like Assad. I don't want any more collection on Assad. I don't want to hear anything more about SVR Russia agents working inside the United States. The president doesn't like to hear that. We're going to be wide open to threats, wide open. And if we start telling collectors, hey, just focus on this, I don't want to hear about that, we're blind. We're blind to certain intelligence. That's the beauty of intelligence collection. You get it, you hoover it up like a vacuum, and then you make sense out of what's relevant and what's not, and you connect dots. That inability to connect dots is what led us to 9/11. So I'm extremely concerned about the vulnerability that her naivety, at best, her naivete and ignorance, at worst, as you're referring to, something more nefarious is controlling her ideology and her thought process, and only through a really comprehensive FBI background investigation, if it's ever allowed to happen, would we get to what is Tulsi's problem? Where is she getting this from? And who is it that is controlling her ideology?
If there's one community in Washington that has a knack for leaking stories in the run-up to confirmation, it's the intelligence community. And I expect that we will see quite a bit about her, more than we have seen so far. But what do you think the reaction is going to be in within the FBI or within these other agencies within the intelligence community, should these nominees get in place? We're called, one of our shows is called Deep State Radio, because we don't believe in a deep state. It's obviously we're sort of taking the Mickey out of the terminology. What they call the deep state are people who honor their oath to the Constitution first and foremost, and don't place political loyalty to one man ahead of that. But this is where the tension lies, because tens of thousands of people within the FBI and within the intelligence community take that oath extremely seriously, have actually devoted their entire lives to their work because of that oath. It seems to me a formula for real deep division and conflict. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's not going to be long before that conflict between what Trump wants and what the Constitution and the rule of law dictates comes to a very ugly head in the form of intelligence community and law enforcement employees leaving for the door. There's going to be some who have a wait and see attitude, particularly in the field. I think, with regard to FBI field officers, they're waiting to see if the politics are going to impact their decisions to open and close cases. That's going to be a real barometer. But with regard to headquarters functions and the career professionals who lead teams, I think we're first likely to see that tension surface at DHS, where they'll be engaged in this wholesale, allegedly massive deportation of people. I think we're going to see some real ugliness there. Then over at FBI, when this kind of instructional Trumpism hits the field, you're going to see mass exodus there as well. And don't forget, U.S. attorneys in every district, the top federal prosecutors are going to all be Trump loyalists. That's going to impact what the FBI can open and close. And then look for career DOJ attorneys who are absolutely committed to the law and the Constitution and are livid at what they think is about to happen. And I think the brain drain will come there. The problem, of course, David, with brain drain is, who do you replace them with? Trump loyalists. So I'm advising people, who are giving me their resume, by the way, can you help me find a job, please? Can I use you? And I'm saying, please hang in there. Please hang in there and fight for as long as you can.
Yeah, no question about that. We have 2 minutes left. I'm going to switch the subject. You've been on TV a lot in the past 24 hours talking about this case of the shooting of the CEO of United Healthcare. I don't want to talk about the specifics of the case. We can't keep up to the news as it breaks. I want to talk about one thing that actually brushes up against everything else we've talked about. In the course of the past day, as you have seen, there has been a response that is, I mean, I'm appalled and baffled by it, where rather than showing any kind of empathy for the family of this man who was gunned down in cold blood on a Manhattan street, there has been this sort of outpouring of feeling on the internet of people saying, well, he deserved it. This is a corrupt industry and so on. And what strikes me about that is not, and that it's disgusting. It is disgusting. But that this is related to the Trump phenomenon of people across the country turning against institutions in our society in a conflict-oriented, violent way that it really just sort of confounds all norms. I'm not defending insurance companies for denying people coverage or not paying them. That's horrible. But there's something about our society in that.
Yeah.
And you know what you saw on January 6th and what you see in some other, that's just a kind of a breakdown. I'm just interested in what you think.
Yeah, you and I have made the same observation, and it's really troubling. Look, many people would say that Kamala Harris lost the election because of a seemingly inability to pay attention to the plight of the working class, and including their insurance coverage and what they go through on a daily basis. Okay, got that. And we should all be tuned into that. But the incivility and violent incivility that Trump has birthed and multiplied by the seeming anonymity of social media and the license being given for people to say any goddamn thing they want is incredibly disturbing, as it comes in the form of people literally being happy that an insurance healthcare executive has been murdered. And everyone's giving their own personal story. So should that be a wake-up call for us that insurance is horribly broken in this country? Yes, we already know that. We know that. And in fact, it's been Democrats that have gone the farthest with trying to help that horrible situation. But the notion that you can rejoice in a guy who, a human being, 50 years old, wife, 2 kids, being murdered on the streets of New York, I think is time for all of us to take a step back and wonder if we've been caught up in the same trap that we've been criticizing the MAGA folks for doing, which is violent extremism and loss of humanity.
Yeah, you know, your last point is the most important, and it's an appropriate place for us to wrap this up. We talk a lot about the threats people in and around Trump's orbit may pose to the rule of law. But they and others in our society pose a threat to the rule of norms. There are more norms that govern the operations of the FBI or the operations of the intelligence community, the operations of presidents, or the operations of society than there are laws that govern them. And when you start setting those aside and saying, we can be kleptocrats, or we can take the law into our own hands, or we can behave in any way that we want to with people of the opposite sex or whatever, that is a kind of social breakdown that's much more difficult to control because it's cultural. It's not legal.
Totally agree. It's where we are.
Well, it's where we are. I'm very, very grateful that at a particularly challenging moment like this, we're able to turn to you, and hopefully we'll be able to do so again in the future. And of course, everybody can follow your comments regularly on MSNBC, on NBC, and the columns that you write for them. And they should, because there's a lot of wisdom coming from them. So for now, thank you, Frank. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Join us again for each of our podcasts, 15 or 16 or 17 we do every week. We've got one coming up on another aspect of the law and the new administration, and what people are doing in case the FBI and other organizations turn on them. So go look for that one too. But for now, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.